Anyway, okay, cool. You ready?
Sure.
Cool. What's up, everybody? This is another podcast by Sky, and welcome all you beautiful people. I'm here today with a special guest. He has his own political talking points, so if you guys want to see that, you can just go on to his website, go on to Twitter, and I'll leave that in the show notes. But right now, I just want to get into a normal, realistic conversation with him and figure out what he's all about. So with me today is John O'Shea.
Hi, Sky. Good
Hey.
to be on with you.
Awesome, man. This is great. So, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe explain, your past, kind of who you are. Give us a little preview,
Well, first of all, so I'm currently running for Texas's 12th congressional district. So I'm running against the incumbent, who's Granger, who's been in office since 1997, since the Clinton administration. And it's kind of an interesting journey because trust me, I never started out thinking I ever wanted to run for office. In fact, I still don't know that I want to run for office, but I felt called to do it. I grew up in Fort Worth. My father was chief of staff at Fort Worth Osteopathic Hospital. My mom actually started the Oak Ridge School, so obviously that's where I went to high school. Went to TCU undergrad, then I went to UT grad school, and when I got out, I was in community banking for 20 years. I started a bank, sold a bank, turned around a problem bank. The problem with banking is it's a heavily government-regulated industry, and so eventually got tired of dealing with the government, which is ironic given what I'm doing now. And so I went to work for my biggest customer at the time, and we started a company where we started off in the energy area out in West Texas, and so the name of the company was Wildcatter. But frankly, I got tired of guys from DFW going out to Midland and Odessa wearing a big kick me sign on our back, so I convinced the partners to reposition the company into sand and gravel quarries and some concrete companies, construction, development here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which ended up being, brilliant foresight because, just the building boom here has been incredible.
Yeah.
But through all that, I guess really, what I'd say is I've had two kind of awakenings in the last several years of my life. And the first one was in 2016 when Donald John Trump became an announced candidate and came down the escalator, and he made all these proclamations about things that were going on in the country, about how our elites were managing the decline of the country and selling us out, and that the middle class and the working class people in this country deserved better. And I thought, well, that's interesting because all my life I've heard, we're not a manufacturing power anymore. That's overseas in China or in India. We're a technology and a service-related industry now, and all of a sudden you had to have two incomes in a family to have kids, and that was just becoming the accepted norm. And he said, no, we can regain our prominence again, and here's how we're going to do it. And I thought, well, that'll be interesting. I'll be honest, I wasn't quite on board because I only knew Donald Trump as the TV personality and kind of bombastic and brash, and but I'll be darned if he didn't do it. And he's the first elected politician in my lifetime that kept all the promises he made. He secured our border. He renegotiated trade deals that were previously unfair to this country. He kept us out of endless wars. He started to de-escalate situations. He brokered new peace treaties,
right,
especially in the Middle East, where we had been interfering for decades and to no avail. In fact, we had troops all over. And he got 4 Arab Muslim countries to sign peace treaties and normalize relationships with Israel. So everything was booming. The economy was soaring. 2019, I think, and this was the thing that really touched me, was that he was most proud of his accomplishments for the working class people. So he liked to tout the fact that working class wages in 2019 rose 10%. Inflation was still under 2%. So we were talking about meaningful gains for families. If you're a family of 4 and you make a household income of $50,000 a year, and all of a sudden now it's $55,000, or if you're $35,000 now it's $39,000. I mean, that's a significant increase. It's a better standard of living, and so it was working. But the thing that was the most shocking to me is that his biggest rivals trying to push back on his agenda weren't the Democrats per se. It was elected leadership on the Republican side. It was the Paul Ryans and the Mitch McConnells that actually kept him from getting a lot of the things that President Trump had to do. He had to do through executive order.
Right. So is that kind of what, I don't know, led you down this path? One of the things that led you down, because you're like, look at this,
So that's the first awakening.
Yeah.
That it didn't have to be the way that we had been told for decades. So we'd been lied to, and that the system was rigged, and we just weren't aware of it. The second awakening I had was then in 2020, when we had the Summer of Love and the COVID lockdowns. Our country's founded on a then radical premise that each one of us are given God-given rights, bestowed to us by God, not granted by a king, not bequeathed to us by a government or at their beck and whim, but God-given rights, and that government's sole purpose is to protect those rights from both domestic and international threats. And what I witnessed when we locked down was that our biggest threat to our God-given rights was, in fact, the government entrusted with protecting those rights. All of a sudden, our businesses were told they're non-essential. We were locked out of our places of worship. Our kids were kept out of schools. I have a disabled wife, and she requires 24/7 care, and so I take her out daily. For 3 months, I wasn't allowed to take her out for our daily visit.
Yeah.
And has some mental deficiencies from the brain cancer that she survived. And so having to explain to a grown woman through a window screen that she wasn't being punished for 3 months, something inside me just snapped, and I said, no, it's consent by we the people. I don't consent, and I don't plan on complying anymore, and so something has to be done.
I mean, I know of several people that couldn't watch their relatives, die in the hospital because they weren't allowed in the room. It was a pretty intense situation for a lot of people, because you had people actually dying from this thing, but also government overreach, essentially.
Well, and I would even say democide, death by government, because I know a number, since I've announced.
Interesting.
I've had a number of people tell me that their loved ones, a father, a husband, a wife, a mother, a sister, died in the hospital because they were neglected, either because they were unvaccinated or because they weren't allowed to come in and make sure they were getting the proper treatment or care. And next thing you know, they were deteriorating so rapidly, and again, not able to see them. In fact, the little care facility where my wife is at that time, there were 4 women who were in there, and my wife was the only one who wasn't very old. All 4 of them still caught COVID, and 2 of them died, and they died alone. And to me, that's just egregious. And
that's sad.
That's not government's role.
Not at all. And you heard about the New York governor. I can't even remember his name, but he
Eric Adams.
Adams.
No, that was not Cuomo.
Cuomo. It wasn't. I guess it wasn't the governor. Sorry. He put in. He just moved people to the nursing homes or whatever, basically just to.
Yeah,
moved them around.
Gretchen Whitmer did it in Michigan as well.
Almost intentionally,
Our current Undersecretary of Health, Rachel Levine, the trans woman, actually did the same thing in Pennsylvania.
Right.
But prior to that, moved her own mother, own mother, out of a nursing facility prior to doing the same thing.
Yeah, and I think both of those awakenings, as you call them, aren't controversial. I think that a lot of people had that same experience. They got, into politics almost because of all this stuff, right? Whether they're on the right or the left, like it could be because they don't like Donald Trump and they thought this was crazy and how could this happen? Now I'm in politics. Or it was the opposite. It was, wow, look at all the things he said and they're all true. And I had no idea that other people thought this as well. This is crazy, right? I think he definitely led me down that rabbit hole, so to speak, into more research on our country just as a whole. Mm-hmm. It definitely got me more into researching CIA, FBI, things like that. A lot more. Then you find out that they're not really protecting you.
Oh.
And that kind of like sets me off. You know what I mean?
They're protecting their own interests.
Yeah. And so to be honest, that's kind of why I started this podcast in a similar fashion, similar reason. I didn't want to be in politics. However, I was like, man, I can start this podcast. I can talk to people and I can get my voice out there and maybe someone will hear it. It was that same idea though. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But anyway, we can move on from that. That's a crazy story. That's an amazing story. I think that makes you like a super humble person.
Well, look, it's not about me. I'm a man of deep faith. I see that you're wearing a cross as well. That's the only jewelry I have on me. And, I prayed about it. I mean, I was very angry. And, the message I got back from God was, to whom much is given, much is required. I've been very successful in my life. I've had some hardships with family and health, but economically have done well. I'm in a position where I'm uncancelable. I'm not for sale. I want to serve.
Right.
And when Jesus was questioned by the Pharisee, what is the greatest commandment? And he said, love your God, your maker with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and strength. And secondly, love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Right.
So, like, for example, yesterday I went to a political function and I had to stop and get gas. And here I am filling up my car, and I see this woman, younger lady, about your age, pull up in a Toyota Corolla, nice looking car, not a beater car or something, and she puts in $5 worth of gas. And that just crushed me.
Yeah.
I have seen more people in the last 6 months have to put items back at the checkout line or have a card declined or only putting in $5 or $10 worth of gas. Yeah. And so, for the people who you mentioned on the left who, I would desperately love to visit with as well and have a very civil conversation.
Sure.
But my one question is, would you rather be living in 2019 or now? Because right now, I ask every time I get up and speak before a group, I want any one person to tell me one thing that's going on in the country right now that they're happy with. And I've given this talk 15, 20 times.
Right.
I've yet to have a single hand go up. People aren't happy about what's happening at the border and the invasion and the fentanyl and the human trafficking and the cartels.
Yeah.
People are not happy with the soaring inflation, with this, our energy just out of control. People are not happy with the threat of war in Ukraine and now with what's happened in Israel and with everything that's going on. People are not happy with the infighting that's going on.
It's a lot of divisiveness.
Yeah. Well, there's not. I don't know one single positive that's going.
And they bruise this just not good behavior, so to speak.
Right.
Have you seen the documentary Painkiller? Speaking of fentanyl.
No, I haven't.
So Painkiller just goes over the Purdue Pharma and their introduction of opioids into America.
Oh, right.
But what's interesting about that is, like, there's a lot of documentaries coming out now that are, like, realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just laying it out there. And it surprises me because that wouldn't have happened, I don't know, 6 years ago.
Right.
We would all be speculating still. We would all still be talking about it like we're conspiracy theorists. Well, you know what I mean? And now it's coming out. It's on Netflix. Everyone's talking about it. And, like, this is how it actually happened.
Well, they're losing control of the narrative. Before, I mean, one of the things with social media, with podcasts like this, with independent journalism, is that you don't have 6 corporations who are now in control of all the narrative.
Right.
Because that's what had been heretofore. So everything that we were told, oh, well, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist, the Hunter Biden laptop, that's Russian disinformation. Oh, COVID didn't come out of a laboratory in Wuhan, China. I mean, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. Well, now that people are able to get and source information independently.
Yeah.
And so when you say something about, like, the big pharma, if you look into it, there has been no other industry that has received more criminal penalties in the history of this country than the pharmaceutical industry. Mm-hmm. And yet, I mean, Johnson & Johnson just recently was hit with a huge award of damages or damages against them because it turned out that the company knew that the baby powder that they were marketing to women, in particular into the black community, was causing ovarian cancer. They knew it, and they sat on that information, and they continued to target that. Now, I don't know what else to call that but evil.
Right.
And so, again, to the point about wanting these outlets to have these conversations and this discussion, I don't think this is Republican versus Democrat. I think this is good versus evil.
This is, for the people, essentially, altogether, just for the people.
Yeah, all together. So, and for example, like America First or MAGA has been, kind of sensationalized or hyped up. Well, look, there has never been a more ethnically or culturally diverse country in the history of the world than this country. And so when you say America First, you mean we don't hate the people outside our borders. We love the people inside of them. Yeah. And we want to take care of them first and do what we can to help our brothers and sisters.
I mean, it's always been a melting pot. Well, that's the whole thing,
Yeah. We do expect you to abide by our principles and our values. We expect you. It's the melting pot. You're supposed to conform, and become part of the country, the fabric.
Part of the society.
Doesn't mean you leave your culture or your pride and your heritage behind, but it means you don't get to implement Sharia law in your neighborhood.
Right.
I mean, so
well, in my experience too, like talking to people that have moved here from out of country, like they usually actually respect that for the most part. A lot of the sensationalization or whatever of all this and like the hype gets built up by mostly people on the left that have been here, were born here, and they'll say they hate America or whatever, which is insane to me. But like,
and they've
it's
never
almost
left this country,
right? It's almost this privileged thing they have in their head, and they've never even left the border.
So if this country is systemically racist and such a terrible place, then why have we had 8 million people over the last 3 years risk life and limb and give up everything to try and enter in to realize the American dream?
Yeah.
I mean,
everyone wants to be here.
Yeah, so instead of welcoming them with open arms, if it really is such a terrible place, we should be telling them, stop. Oh, wait, don't come here. It's awful.
Yeah, exactly.
But look, I lived in South America for 5 years. I can tell you, in beautiful places with beautiful culture, beautiful people. But I assure you, the majority of those people, if they had the opportunity to come spend some time, not necessarily just, emigrate and, permanently, but spend some time, they would love to be in the United States. The United States is a shining city on the hill to the rest of the world. And in fact, I have friends now from South America who are reaching out to me, seeing what's going on in this country, saying, you guys can't fall. You're it. You're the last standing bastion of hope.
Yeah, and if we do, exactly. People look up to that. They really do, outside of America.
Yeah. So
that brings me to the border then. What, if you're in Congress, now I want you to walk me through some things here. There's a few questions I have. I know everyone knows like the ultimate goal of Congress. I know everyone gets that. They've gone to history lessons and all that stuff, right? In high school, I get it. But what I want to know is, what does that actually look like day to day? Mm-hmm. Like, what are you actually doing in Congress? To better society, whether you're voting for this or that. I don't know how that works. You know what I mean?
Well, so our founding fathers, and again, people on the left like to think that they were awful people. Well, they were very deeply spiritual, God-fearing people who bucked the long odds. I mean, the fact that our country exists is evidence to me of God's hand in things, because it was a ragtag bunch of colonials taking on then the world's greatest superpower against the greatest expeditionary force that had ever been launched in the history of the world. And talking about the divisive nature of the country now, during the Revolutionary War, and trust me, I'll meander this rabbit trail back to your question.
You're good. It's a podcast, man. We can talk all day.
Yeah. So a third of the country were for the Continental Army. A third of the country were Tories, supported the crown, and a third of the country just said, I'm going to duck my head down, wait for the fighting to clear. And so they were brave, they were bold, and they said, look, we pledge our lives, our treasure, and our sacred honor. We all hang together or we hang individually. And they enumerated this Constitution, which is our contract with the government. It's where we agree to give them power to protect our rights. And in the Constitution, Congress, in particular the House of Representatives, is enumerated legislative power. You have the executive branch, the Congress, and the judiciary. Well, the House in particular controls the purse strings. So if you think about it, they're like the planning, the budget. Now there's individual committees, small business administration, transportation, agriculture, veterans affairs, all these different committees. But really at the end of the day, all that feeds into the spending. So to me, government is supposed to operate like a business. Right now it operates like anything but. And so, the purpose of Congress is to prioritize, pass legislation representing the will of the people, protecting our rights, making sure we're, doing what's best for the national interest, and then B, spending and allocating resources appropriately to serve those purposes. So, what kind of the day-to-day thing is, a lot of committee meetings, a lot of hearings on the floor, a lot of time to talk to experts, fact-finding, things of that nature, and then again, ultimately passing budgets, spending we the people's money to implement our will to protect our rights through our government.
Right.
Now, with regard to the border, it's funny. I know the House recently passed a new bill that was going to. We have enough laws in place right now. The fact of the matter is, this current administration is the most lawless regime I have ever witnessed in my life, and they're just not. They've just made the conscious decision they're not going to follow the law.
Would you say even in Texas?
Oh,
I want to make this clear. Like
our state house has some things to be desired as well, even though it's Republican controlled, quote unquote. They don't represent the will of the voters who put them in office, and I think we're going to see a big backlash. But yeah, no, the federal government right now is purposefully breaking and violating the law and court orders. I mean, they've been ordered to return, go back to the return to Mexico policy that President Trump had, which was working, which is that if people are really seeking asylum, which is the whole purpose of there's legal immigration, and we take in legally more people into our country every year than the rest of the world combined.
Right.
So it's not that we're not a charitable people, and it's not that we don't want people. And if we want to have a conversation about reforming legal migration, I'm all for that.
Right.
But if you're going to show up at the border and just hop over and jump the turnstile and not follow the legal process, then you're supposed to claim asylum. And there needs to be a reason you're claiming asylum. You're from a war-torn country. You're being threatened by cartels. You're something of that nature.
I mean, from what I've learned, I've learned that migrants have just learned what to say.
They're being taught.
So they're being taught, right?
Yeah.
And so they come in and they're just saying that they're seeking asylum, and they don't have to give their reasoning. That's crazy. They get free cell phones and all that stuff too, and that's.
No. I have a child that just recently was mugged on the streets in Las Vegas.
Wait, what? For real?
Yep. And
whoa,
lost all her.
Like recently, like
yeah. Oh yeah.
So she saw the dome and everything, or whoever it was. Was it your? I think you have a daughter and a son, right?
Well, I have 3 kids.
Oh, you have 3 kids. Okay,
yeah.
3 kids. Okay.
But yeah, no, she was in Las Vegas, got robbed.
Wow.
Lost all of her ID, and so I'm sitting there thinking as we're getting her birth certificate again and then getting an appointment with Social Security, get her Social Security card. Now we're on a wait list to get to the Department of Public Safety to get her ID card again.
Right.
And I just thought, I could have just dropped her off at the border and she could have just run across and she would have gotten all this taken care of for her.
Yeah.
It's been a 2-month process.
Right.
But yeah, so I'm Catholic. Although a lot of my friends think I'm more evangelical than Catholic. But it pains me, but the government is currently spending money. For example, Catholic Charities being one of the big ones. Catholic Charities has received $3 billion from the federal government over the last several years.
Right.
They are going into South and Central America. Of course, we have people coming from 160 different countries. It's just if they hit South America, they're working their way up north. And we have NGOs that are ushering them along. In fact, Alejandro Mayorkas, the head of the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, which actually acts as a concierge service. They literally were just in Colombia down at the Darien Gap, which is kind of the choke point. It's where the Pan America Highway ends, and it's really this impenetrable jungle to get up into Central America. And they worked on expediting ways so that they could get people up through her and setting up camps in Panama and other Central American countries so that they can speed up processing people illegally entering into our country. I mean, it's insanity.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. So you just touched on a point where you said that I guess we're not doing the return to Mexico policy in Texas.
The court ordered the Biden administration to implement it again, and they've just thumbed their noses at it.
Oh, the court ordered Biden administration, right? Okay, yep. I was wondering where that fell off.
Yeah,
and it fell off at them.
It's the federal government.
Okay, because I thought he had mentioned doing that. I thought he had mentioned saying that he would do it, but I guess it was just the court.
Right. It was. Okay. You have Abbott, our governor here in Texas, who is doing some things. I don't think enough, but literally we have National Guard putting up concertina wire, trying to hold the line, DPS people, and then you have Department of Homeland Security and immigration people literally with cutters going in, cutting and pulling up openings to bring people in. And so, I'm friends with our Attorney General, Ken Paxton, and he said, look, I don't know what to do other than say, short of there being an armed conflict between state agents versus the federal agents,
right.
How do you prevent that? I mean, they're willfully breaking not only the intention of the Texas people and the Texas government of trying to secure our borders. And again, it's not that I despise those people trying to come in. I get it. If you have a chance to go have the American dream and you think I have an opportunity to better my family, you're doing the logical, rational thing. And they're being told you're going to be welcomed here. They're being told you're going to be given free health care. You're going to be given public education. You're going to be set up on welfare. You're going to be given an ID, and we're going to transport you anywhere you want to go in the country.
Pretty much.
We have homeless people. We have veterans who are suffering with addiction, dying at a high rate daily due to suicide. I mean, just right out the streets of where the studio is, there are two private entities, the Presby Night Shelter and Union Gospel Mission, and they're overflowing. And there are people in the streets, and they're dealing with mental health.
Right here in Fort Worth.
Right here in Fort Worth, which is one of the most prosperous cities in the country.
Right.
And we're not taking care of our own people.
Right.
And I would like to say we can do all things for everyone, but we have limited resources. We're not taking care of our own people first.
Yeah, no, we're not. And
charity begins at home.
Right. Elizabeth Beck is our councilwoman for Fort Worth in my district right now, and it's just not working out. I don't think. I'm frustrated, and. Yep. Anyway, she got, like I said, like I was talking to you earlier about that, she got completely annihilated on the internet because she, I guess, is Jewish. And I was just like, what the heck, man? Yeah. It's your constituents, if you're on the left, seem to, they sway with the wind. Well, and it's like as soon as you do one thing, one thing that might not be somewhat aligned with their ideology, you're instantly ousted.
It's a very strange coalition of people with very divergent interests. The one thing that they all tend to agree on is that America is an awful, evil empire. Right. That's about the only thing that brings them together. In fact, I have a friend who's the president of the Dallas Log Cabin Republicans, which is, the gay conservative men.
Right. And
he sent me a text, and it showed this. Literally these protesters holding Palestinian flags and a banner saying, gays for Palestine.
Yeah.
And then the picture underneath was Palestinians for gays, and it showed a number of people being executed for being homosexual in Arab countries.
Right.
I mean, so it's a strange intersection.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, man. So Kay Granger is the person you're running against. I looked into her voting record a little bit, and her bill record, I should say, and she's on the committee for appropriations.
She chairs it.
Yeah, which is insane. If anyone's listening right now, that means that she is on the federal committee that decides how much money we spend on certain things before it reaches the Treasury.
Yeah, what happens is the committees work up all the different bills. In fact, so there was a fight for who was going to be Speaker of the House in January when the Republicans took the House back. And in fact, there were 20 holdouts who didn't want Kevin McCarthy, or said, if it's going to be McCarthy, you're going to agree to go back to the old rules where every single member in Congress has a vote. It's not just the leadership that have all the control. We're going to have 12 independent, clean spending bills. It's not going to be this 14,000-page omnibus bill that gets passed in the dead of night. The American taxpayers are going to get to see where their money is actually going.
Right.
So if we're allocating money for, and I kid you not, this was actually a line item in the omnibus bill, money for drag shows in Ecuador, which I lived in Ecuador. It's a very Catholic conservative country. I assure you they don't appreciate us sending money for drag shows there. But if you're going to do it, it's going to be plain sight, so that everybody sees it. So those were one of the conditions that ultimately got Kevin McCarthy the speakership position. He then subsequently reneged on promises, which is why they did a motion to vacate the chair. But let's get back to the spending, because that is where Kay Granger, Congresswoman Granger, presides as chairwoman, and she's been the ranking member this is her third term. So they promised they would get 12 clean spending bills before the end of the fiscal year. Well, the federal government's fiscal year end is September 30th. It's not calendar year.
Yeah.
So they knew in January 12 bills to get done.
Right.
By early July, all the committees that feed their recommendations on, in the different areas, like for example, Veteran Administration, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, all these different spending bills, Department of Agriculture. These are the things that we're earmarking. These are the things that we want spent to carry out, to run the administration, to oversee these areas. Well, when the committees had basically done their work and were ready for appropriations to start passing the spending bills, they took a 6-week recess. They had only passed one appropriations bill, and that was Veterans Administration.
In July?
They started in August, the recess. So they basically went home. They got back, and all of a sudden their back was up against it. So it was either unbelievably bad planning which I don't think that they're that unintelligent,
right,
or it was intentional because they didn't want to actually have to show the American people 12 clean spending bills and start to show. Because here's the problem right now. What they're wanting to do, and what they are doing right now with this continuing resolution, in 2022, the federal government took in $5 trillion worth of tax collections. So think of it. That's the pot of money we have to spend. They spent last year $7 trillion. So again, as a banker, if a business person came in and showed me a financial statement and said, my business has net income of $5 million a year to spend, but we're spending $7 million, I would say, but get out of here. We're not lending to you. I mean, that's not sustainable.
That's crazy, yeah.
And not only is it not sustainable, we now, as a result of that, have a national debt. So deficit is the difference that we spend over what we take in every year. So it's like if a family makes $50,000 a year, but they spend $70,000 a year, they're putting $20,000 on a credit card.
Yeah.
It's no different than what our federal government's doing. It's really not that complicated.
Right.
That's really what they're doing.
Right.
It's just they roll it out in treasury notes and bonds. So, okay, we're $33 trillion in debt. I know it's hard. I want your viewers to actually sit down and write the number 33 trillion and look at the number of decimals or places.
Freaking crazy.
Yeah. To give you a better idea to be able to wrap your head about, that's over $250,000 per U.S. household.
Yeah. Well, you see those like videos, like those random, hate to bring this up, but whatever, random TikTok videos that are like, they'll show you the difference in 1,000 and a million and all this stuff with like beans or whatever it is, like laying down, and it's insane.
Yeah.
So if you guys are watching, just go look at one of those videos and then imagine a trillion.
Or just take a look at what's in your bank account and understand that right now that your family's household owes your portion of the national debt that was spent supposedly on your behalf is $250,000 plus.
Right.
We're not paying it off either. We're only paying the interest. So we're making the bare minimum on the credit cards. In fact, what government is doing is they're coming back and asking for additional credit cards, raising the credit limit. So Congresswoman Granger has not done her job. And in fact, they got, right before the end of the fiscal year, they got 3 bills rushed through. Now, they were big ones. They were Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and the State Department international spending.
I actually read a couple of them. Yeah. The first few. I didn't read all of it.
And they were making cuts. Well, guess what? When you're in D.C., it doesn't pay to cut spending. You get rewarded by the lobbyists and all the special interest groups if you spend more. And if you take a look at where Congresswoman Granger's campaign gets funded from, it's from lobbyists and special interest groups. In fact, there's an area of Washington, D.C. called K Street, which is where all the lobbyists and all the money goes. There was actually Congressman Matt Gaetz called this out, and I've since had it verified. They were having an appropriations committee meeting trying to rush to get bills through before the end of the fiscal year so that they didn't have to do this continuing resolution and just kick the can down the road, which they had promised the American people they wouldn't do. That's why the American people gave the House back to the Republicans. And she left to go to a fundraiser thrown for her by lobbyists.
Wow.
If that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about where her interests lay.
Well, I mean, yeah, you're right, dude. She's if you say cuts, I read one of the bills and like it was one of the Department of Defense ones, and there were not cuts.
No, well,
it was crazy. I was seeing some of it was basically saying like in a bill, if you guys haven't read one, it'll tell you like this can work if you make this amount bigger, basically is what it'll do. And it'll tell you what the previous amount was. And it was going up like millions of dollars, every single one of these things, billions, millions and billions, like all of this.
Right.
It's like I was reading the numbers and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Well, and again, for you at home, the government doesn't do anything to make money. They're not selling a product. They're not marketing their services. It's your money.
Right.
They collect taxes. That's where it comes from. So we say that we love our children and our grandchildren, and we're leaving them a future of debt slavery.
Right.
In essence.
We're already seeing some of that, dude. Like you have like I guess your generation, I'm not sure. I think in your age group, maybe a little bit older actually, we're able to live and have a decent like household income and be able to afford a car and the house and all the things they needed type things, Right. Basic, I wouldn't say basic essentials because it's a little bit more than that, but it's the quote unquote American dream, the reasonable American dream, the middle class American dream, and that's kind of been swept away. Like, I feel like it's just been absolutely eroded. Like, now, college isn't worth it, because if I went to college, I'd be in $200,000 in debt or whatever.
Just for indoctrination with no marketable skills.
Indoctrination, no marketable skills, and then it's actually hard to find a job in that field because you're very specialized. A lot of people are getting hired now that they're basically like jack of all trades, which is kind of what I am anyway, but like it's easier to get a job that way because you're like, I can do this and this other thing, especially with the way the economy's headed. Yep. Because jobs will want to hire somebody that can do a lot of things versus having 3 guys do these 3 things or whatever,
So kind of getting back to Congresswoman Granger and appropriations and kind of how all that works and why it should matter to people listening to this. So not only are you leaving this debt that's unsustainable, where that literally the amount of interest that we're going to be paying just on the debt to keep from going bankrupt, which I argue we're already bankrupt, is just whether or not we're going to do a Chapter 11 reorganization bankrupt or a Chapter 7 straight liquidation, which frankly, if the U.S. defaults on its debt, which is considered the only risk-free instrument in the world, then Katie, bar the door. I don't know what happens to the financial markets around the globe. I think it makes 07, 08 look like a cakewalk in comparison. But if that's not existential threat enough to you, you're living the consequences of this unchecked, reckless government spending right now, because there's 2 causes of inflation that are what are hitting us right now. And inflation is the cruelest tax, because while I might be able to better bear the fact that gas is now $4 a gallon, I think of that young lady over there who put $5 worth of gas in her car. It hits the working class and middle class people disproportionately.
Yeah, always, yeah.
And it's simply this. If the government is spending this money, they have to get it somewhere. So they're putting more money into the system. Anything there's more of devalues what you have.
Right.
So the money in your bank account, that if you had $1,000 in your bank account in 2020, it's now worth 17% less because of the inflation. You have 17% less buying power. And that's the consequences of what you're seeing, where people are now having to decide, do I afford, Timmy's soccer lessons or groceries for the week? Or do I put, gas in the car? Or do I buy lunch for the kids? I mean, it's self-inflicted. That's the thing that's the most egregious to me about all of this. Every single problem that we're facing right now. So, for example, inflation. Day one, Biden goes in there, kills the Keystone Pipeline, starts implementing green energy. Well, guess what? This country isn't set up for it. It's not sustainable. It's incredibly expensive.
Right.
The probably the number one tell for how a standard of living of a population is their availability to cheap and abundant energy. If you think about it, civilization resided around it. Energy started with gathering food and being able to eat more efficiently, and then all of a sudden mastering fire, and then all of a sudden the Industrial Revolution, and then all of a sudden oil and gas and combustible engines, and so it's allowed this kind of increase in standard of living. I mean, heating, air conditioning, transportation.
Right.
Energy touches everything that's in our lives, and so when they waged war against energy, all of a sudden, prices started skyrocketing. Price of food, price of gasoline, electric prices. So that was probably the first big shock to the system that kicked off inflation. But then the second one is this unbridled government spending. And so what countries are doing are saying, we don't think you're actually protecting the dollar. We don't think you're running yourself in a reasonable or responsible manner. So in order for us to take your bonds, we require higher interest rates because there's more risk associated with it. So it's just this perpetual spiraling, inflation running out of check.
Yeah.
And so the Federal Reserve, which I don't like as an institution, but what their only instrument is to kind of slow down the economy to get inflation in check is to raise interest rates. If you raise interest rates, well, people buy less, companies spend less, invest less, and things slow down until prices start to stabilize. Well, inflation is going up still while they're raising interest rates because the federal government won't stop this reckless, drunken spending.
Right. And that's where Kay Granger comes in. Now, what I want to ask you then is, like, if you're elected, you wouldn't be the chair of the appropriations, right? And you wouldn't try to be on that committee?
That's a pretty prestigious committee, so I don't think it's something that typically is tapped for a freshman congressman.
Okay.
But my point of it is I'd have a vote.
Right. Okay, there we go. I was going to ask, where can you throw your hat in?
So there are different committees that obviously I would get assignments for. Like with my business background, small business administration or something like that.
Sure.
They're finance, my banking background. But what I would see my role in doing is going and getting in front of the cameras and having town halls and explaining to people what is taking place in government. There's no transparency, no accountability. In fact, the whole reason why they weren't doing these separate individual spending bills, because people like you are actually then able to go read it, versus that omnibus that Nancy Pelosi passed the last time we passed a budget was 14,000 pages.
Yeah.
Who in their right mind is going to read through that? I assure you the people who voted on it didn't have time that even their staff
No, not at all.
Read it.
And you get a certain amount of time to even do it.
So what family thinks it's a good idea that, hey, we're going to put Junior in charge of the spending for the year for the household, and Junior just gave us this kind of sealed envelope, and we'll just approve it without seeing it or understanding it or knowing if we can even afford it.
Well, that's been happening for a decade at least.
Decades.
So, I mean, is there even a way that you would be able to change that specific little thing? Like, make bills shorter. I don't know what you would even do, but I'm just...
No, you can. Well...
I mean, I know your bills, you can create them however you want, but I mean, like, is there a way to put it to where there's like a maximum amount of pages that a bill can...
100%. There's no reason why it has to be so arcane.
Right.
I mean, things can be simple and in plain English. They don't have to be this, legalese with all these little loopholes and reference, section .244-3-2.
I mean, all the politicians are already used to having 240 characters, because of Twitter. So
yeah,
you know what I mean.
We're able to hold a conversation with 240 characters.
Yeah.
How come we can't pass a spending bill under 1,000 pages? So, but they don't even like doing it that way because they're being held accountable. What they don't want the individual voters, the people, to actually see what's going on.
Yeah. Wow.
Otherwise, I mean, why would they object to it? Why would they have done what they did? I mean, it cost Kevin McCarthy his speakership.
Yeah.
And now the current House vote, they want Jim Jordan for the Republican Party, and you have 20 holdouts, 22, I think, as of
one
yesterday.
of them's K, right? One of them's Granger.
One of them's K. And guess why? Because Jim Jordan wants to restore fiscal sanity to the House. Well, she's in charge of spending. Somebody who's got a spending addiction doesn't want to be told, hey, we have to start to live within our means.
Right.
She would actually rather form a coalition government with Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats and have people who are going to allow the game to be played the way it has been, rather than, hey, we can't keep spending ourselves into oblivion.
Now, how much of that do you think is actually her, or is it because now she's tied, she has her hands tied? You know what I mean? Like, whenever you get into that position where you have lobbyists and you have people paying for it and endorsing you all the time, don't you think they have a say at that point? You know what I mean? They probably are able to be like, hey, we need this money.
Yeah. Do you mean that maybe she's bought and paid for, just not quite as blatantly as President Biden?
Yeah, exactly. Here's the thing about that. The bought and paid for thing is like a label you could probably put on almost any politician.
Right. Well,
how are you going to avoid that?
So I'm not accepting money from lobbyists.
Okay.
In fact, my biggest campaign contribution comes from me. The area of congressional races is the most tightly controlled. Like, for example, in state races, you mentioned Elizabeth Beck.
Yeah.
There's no limit on how much money any one individual donor can give to her. Well, in a congressional race, and this is a lot of money, so I'm not making this insignificant, but whereas like somebody could write a check to Elizabeth Beck for $100,000, the most they could write for me is $6,600, of which I could spend $3,300 on the primary race and $3,300 on the general race.
What the heck? So in the grand scheme of things, I don't know if you guys know this listening, but races cost a lot more than that.
Yeah.
So DeSantis getting millions of dollars for his race was just the first initial, it was like 18 million. For the first initial donors he had. He has more now. I'm just initially it was like in 24 hours I've raised this much money. It was that thing for him.
Presidential elections run in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
So you're talking about as a congressman getting $6,600. That's crazy.
Well, but the good thing about that is,
I guess it levels the playing field a little bit.
Well, yes and no. So what she's been sending out mailers and people are not responding. The individual voters are not happy with her. All you have to do is look at her Twitter feed or her social media. And
but then how's she done this for like how many 12 terms or whatever it is?
Because all the lobbyists. Well, people weren't aware of the fact. So, and look, I'll count myself in this. I was asleep. I thought if somebody had an R behind their name that they were Republican, and they were actually eschewing the Republican values that they promised to the people. If you read her campaign material, she's tough as bootstrap, and she's tight on spending, and she's keeping these Democrats in check. And then what you look at what she actually does, her voting record, for example, there's a group called Conservative Review, and they actually take each individual bill that she votes on and they mark, she voted conservative, she voted liberal. Basically, she voted Republican, voted Democrat. She votes conservative 51% of the time.
Right.
49% of the time she votes on the liberal side of the agenda.
Yeah.
So she doesn't represent, this district is a conservative district. She doesn't represent our values, but the problem with conservatives is that we live our lives. We go to work, we take our kids to the school programs, we go to church, and we focus on...
most people don't have time to do all that.
No, well...
research it.
Right. And so it's not until it causes you a problem. The one good thing I can say about the 2020 election being stolen and this feckless regime that we have that's screwed up this country 8 ways to Sunday, intentionally in my estimation, because even a broken clock is right twice a day, is that we get to see the other side of it now. And we get to see just how awful this kind of government run is, this authoritarian Marxism and this unchecked spending. And so people, unfortunately, it's having consequences on their life. So it's waking them up, and they're saying, wait a second, why is crime out of control? Why is fentanyl flooding our streets? Why are all these illegal aliens?
Yeah, like honestly, forget the voting record stuff and forget all that in general. Like, I don't really even care if you voted Republican or Democrat on certain bills or whatever. All I care about is that thing progresses us towards a better future, so to speak.
Which should be a bipartisan issue, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like if a Democrat came up and said, hey, we need to spend less, that may not ever happen. But if that were to happen, I would say, more power to you, man, because that's exactly what we need anyway.
Oh,
you know what I'm saying?
I would be the first to admit, if any of these policy outcomes that are proposed by the left bore any good fruit, then I'd be the first to say,
so that's what I'll say then. Yeah, because 49% on her side to vote for Democrat is whatever. I don't really know the bills that she voted for anyway. However, if they all led the wrong way, then that sucks.
Well, I'll give you a perfect example, and this might be good for some of your younger viewers and some of the people who lean on the left. The narrative that Black Lives Matter proposes, that cops unduly target African American men. So, okay, let's just look at the numbers. Any given year, unarmed black people who have an interaction with the police, somewhere between 10 to 20 of them are killed. And that's 10 to 20 too many. I get it. Half the kids' situations, it's somebody wrestling for the cop's gun, somebody trying to run over the cop, something like that. So it's deemed a justifiable shooting. The other half, police either, acted inappropriately or, unauthorized use of force or something like that.
Right.
So 10 to 20, there's a rule called Pareto analysis, which is if something really is of importance to you, you look at the smallest amount, 20% normally contributes 80% of the problem. Well, there are 5,000 black people who are murdered in this country every year. So are we going to focus on the 10 to 20? If Black Lives Matter, and look, I don't disagree with that statement. I think all lives matter, and I know that's supposed to be racially offensive, but sure. I think you're my brother or sister, regardless of your skin color or place of origin or whatever. I mean, that's what God commanded me to do, is to love you as my neighbor.
Right.
But do we focus on the 5,000 who are being murdered in the inner cities in gang and drug-related violence, or do we focus on the 10 to 20? So, I think the narrative's wrong.
Right.
But that was a propagandist play. I get it. It sensationalized and it made headlines. So their solution, defund the police. Okay. I want to know if anybody went into these crime-infested neighborhoods and asked those people living there if they thought that was a good idea. So they defund the police. The police are demoralized now. They don't want to go into areas. They don't want to have interactions because they're afraid of all the press and publicity and all the litigation that's going on. And so crime is spiking in these inner cities and in these depressed and ridden neighborhoods that unfortunately are disproportionately minority inhabited. And so, again, you'll know the tree by the fruit that it bears. Are those people's lives better now as a result of that, or are they worse? And if you ask them candidly, I think they would tell you, no, it's worse now. We would like to have a police presence on our streets again.
Right.
So it just, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I don't care what the virtue signal is. Label me whatever you want. I want positive outcomes for people. I want people to be able to flourish and thrive and to meet their God-given mission in life. It's not for me to dictate how they do that, but it's my job to try and do everything I can to make sure that they have as much agency and ability while also being held accountable.
Right.
And, right now, government's not doing that.
There's like no collaboration in government right now. That's what I feel like.
No.
And it's causing this. It's like, so if someone has an idea, might be a good intention. Hey, let's fix this somehow. Let's fix the 5,000 to 10,000, black people that are getting murdered from drug-related issues and all that stuff in our inner cities. They might come up with a plan. Oh, defund the police. And then someone else across the room can say, that may not work. Let's try this. But they're like, no, I'm right.
Right.
Like there's no collaboration. I feel like that's what's happening. Anytime I talk to someone, even in like a regular person working, whatever, doing something over here in Fort Worth, I'll talk to them and that's what they'll say. They'll just instantly, it's like a thing of, you don't agree, so I'm going to attack you type thing. And it's so weird to me. And it happens no matter who it is. I don't really know what their, political leanings are usually, but that's like, it's so hard to just, collaborate.
Well, Dan Bongino, I think, says this best, which is that, conservatives think that liberals are well-intentioned people with bad ideas. Liberals think that conservatives are bad people with bad ideas. And, I can't express strongly enough. My intention or my desire is for everybody in this country to flourish, regardless of whether you believe ideologically or spiritually with me or not. Again, you are my brother and sister. I'm commanded to love you. But when I see bad outcomes from bad policies, I call them out. Look, the mayor of Dallas, who was a state representative. In fact, my friend Ken Paxton was in the state house with him when he was there, and he was a Democrat. But Ken, I needed to talk to somebody over in the Dallas city government, and he said, reach out to the mayor. He's actually a good guy, even though he's a Democrat. He thinks that the party's kind of lost their mind, and he's not on board with that. Well, he actually has done a tremendous job over the last couple of years reducing crime in Dallas, and then just recently announced
he's a Republican.
Yeah, he converted and changed parties.
Yeah, I don't think right. That's why. Yeah, labels to me and probably people that are my age don't matter.
No,
and I don't really care to hear it. Like I don't really know. It sounds bad, but like, doesn't really matter to me how you're running. I guess what I want people to understand too is that you have to run a certain way so that you can actually make a difference.
Right.
It's that whole. It might sound bad too to say like playing the game so you can run until you run the game type thing. So like you couldn't run it as an independent or something in Fort Worth or in District 12 and make it. It's not gonna happen.
No.
It's unfortunate,
Yeah.
Because like some of your ideas, it sounds like, are not just Republican. Like there's some libertarian tendencies and some things like that, and I think everyone would agree.
Well,
you can't be all. I mean, there's so much nuance. You can't just be all on one.
So I don't think that the government is the solution to most of our problems. I think, as I've stated earlier, I think right now government is causing a disproportionate amount of our problems in our life. And I just don't know any other way to put it than that.
Yeah.
And so, if that makes me sound libertarian, I get it. But look, traditional republicanism want small government.
Yeah.
The less interaction, and you talked earlier while you were setting up for this, that, you think that local politics matter. Well, that's the actual Republican idea, is that things should be as pushed down, starting with the family unit. Give as much autonomy and power to the family unit as possible.
Right.
Then the local government, be it school board, city council, mayor, the local police department, and sheriff, and then it goes up to the county level,
right,
and then to the state. But what impacts your life the most is first your family and then your community. So the federal government should have the softest touch on our lives. Again, their whole reason for being is to protect our God-given rights from foreign and domestic threats. And somehow they've lost the script, and we've lost our way with that.
Yeah.
And now they've act like our parents, and frankly, just their behavior is unexplainable. Just unexplainable. It's causing inflation. It's causing the border crisis. It's causing this drug and mental health crisis in this country. We're threatening war while our military is actually not able to meet their recruiting numbers because of all the woke that's going on in the military.
Right.
When the military's sole purpose is survive the mission and destroy the enemy, and make sure you got the back of the brother in your foxhole with you. That's the mission. It's not to combat climate change or fight against white rage or whatever it was Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, Milley, said, which that's our top military commander.
Yeah.
And that's what he has to say.
It's pretty crazy, man.
Yeah.
We're ruining that image for sure. Well, cool, man. It was good talking to you.
Yeah.
I think we got what we need, and I think it's good to see someone actually standing up and trying. You know what I mean? Whether or not it happens or you succeed, it's fine, because like, what is your plan if you don't win? Are you going to continue to do this?
So, okay, God called me to do this.
Yeah.
The results are up to Him. I'm supposed to put in the work.
Right.
And really, the last thing I would say is the whole reason for I'm running is that there's this famous quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German priest during World War II who actually was part of Operation Valkyrie to assassinate Hitler. So you had a pastor, I said priest, it was a pastor, literally gave his life trying to assassinate Hitler to end the war early. And what Dietrich Bonhoeffer said was, silence in the face of evil is in itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. So I take that very seriously. I need to meet my maker at some point in time with a clear conscience. And so I'm running this race to be a servant to the people. It's God, the people, government.
Right.
Right now we have it flipped on its head. Government, the people, God. And so if somebody wants an actual concerned servant, somebody who isn't going there to be a rock star because they always had aspirations or because they needed to be, doing insider stock deals or whatever.
Yeah.
Money doesn't matter to me. Power doesn't matter to me. I wouldn't even be worried about getting my name out there, except that's the whole way that you get elected and voted into office. But if somebody wants somebody who literally would have an open door policy, would give out his personal cell phone number, who would literally take the time to visit with people and hear their concerns. And if you disagree with me, that's okay. I mean, and I may disagree with you ultimately as well, and we may agree to disagree. And I'm not going to change my message based on who the audience is.
Right.
This is who I am. I believe that the majority of people feel like I feel. Now, it's possible that's wrong, or it's possible that my message doesn't get out.
Well, either way, I mean, we can find common ground, and that's how we need to do this. Moving forward, we all need to figure out how to find common ground, because that is the best way to, be friendly, be friends, and like collaborate,
Yeah. Well, take the hate out of it to begin with, because I can assure you, I don't hate anybody. In fact, Congresswoman Granger, whom I disagree with very strongly, but I bear her no animus. I mean, I hope she has a fruitful, peaceful, long and prosperous life.
Right.
I just not in that position. So,
right. Yeah. I hear you, man. All right, cool. Guys, it's been a nice podcast, and I will see you guys later.
Right. Thanks.
Say Toasty. Toasty.